has been in this group over the years sort of a tradition of having a roundup of antivirus products for Windows, and we might be able to get a little bit on Mac and others. What I want to do is to share, starting with the test results. What I want to do is go from things that are what I believe to be more objective to things that are probably a little more subjective in this roundup. And I try to go over some of the criteria that they've used. I won't go into deep detail about methods that have been used because I'm not an expert on methodology in test beds. So I'm going to start with AV test and open up a link. And AV test is one of the testing labs. There are actually 3 testing labs I found online. West Coast Labs closed a while back, but AV Test is one of the ones that's been around for a while. And they have tested a wide variety of antivirus products. And most people focus on either whether a product is certified by the lab or what its rankings are in terms of protection. But there are other things to consider. For example, the performance impact, which sometimes is higher for products that offer more protection. Sometimes sometimes the performance is just as good. Performance impact is generally correlated with the thoroughness with which the product protects you. More protection means it may slow down the system. It takes more CPU cycles. Usability is a little subjective, but it includes false positives in this particular lab's ratings. And what we see here is basically OnLab is one that doesn't show up in everybody's tests, but when it is tested, it usually does pretty well. I believe it's Chinese. Avira is pretty familiar to most of us, but the interesting thing is not all test labs rate Avira that high in protection. And Bitdefender is up there, and almost everybody agrees on Bitdefender. BullGuard they put up there, and not everybody does. ESET Internet Security, some have rated it highly, some haven't. F-Secure and GData Total Security. Kaspersky is usually way up there, and I'll have a little bit much later on about something that CNET says about Kaspersky and something they say about Avast. Malwarebytes Premium was rated by this lab, and it rates very well, although it does have a problem with false positives and other usability factors. Microsoft Windows Defender is rated as a top product. It does perfectly well across the boards, but you will see some weaknesses in it in some charts that they have. Norton LifeLock is the current Norton 360 or Norton LifeLock are their current products, and they rate very well.
So now, is the ranking on a scale of 10, or what is it?
6 is the highest, and there's nothing here that's below 4, but 0 is possible. If you got a 0, you shouldn't even bother submitting your product. So Charlie, the answer is it's not a 10-point scale. It's a 6-point scale. And later on, just a little bit later, I'll show charts that show more detail in percentages or pieces of 100 anyway. PCmatic and Trend Micro did not get the top product certification because they had serious issues. And when you're talking about performance impact with Trend Micro, that's significant when it drops from a 6 to a 5 in this chart. And PCmatic, I think the problem was a lot of false positives, but there are other usability factors that dropped it out of top product consideration. But even a product that doesn't score a perfect 6 category in protection, Total AV, nevertheless got certified because it was very good on everything else. Now, I'm going to go into something a bit more detailed. So that isn't where I want it. I think it may not be these guys then. Okay, AV test tends to be more qualitative. We can now move on to AVComparatives, which tends to be a little more detailed. And bring up their test charts. We'll accept the cookies. I am going to exaggerate the test charts a little by going not 0 to 100, but a scale of 80 to 100. So this will show up small differences. And they tested Avast, AVG, Avira, Bitdefender, all these other ones. So we have many of the same products being tested by the two labs. In AVComparatives, they found that in real world protection, and I'll have a little reference about just what real world might mean to you versus what it means to a test lab. In real world protection, the serious issues that they found were in total AV, and this is only a difference between a 100% score and a 98% score. And ESET and GData weren't quite as good as some of the others, and Avira didn't perform quite as well. The bottom line is false positives. That's a serious concern when you get those. The false positives can make you distrust the product and ignore its warnings. So Norton LifeLock had a lot of problems with that. They tend to flag stuff that's legitimate. Panda, in many of the lab tests, not just AVComparatives, has serious problems with false positives. Trend Micro has some problems, and Malwarebytes tends to flag stuff that others don't. Malwarebytes flag stuff they consider to be potentially unwanted, PUP or PUM. And other products don't gear toward that. They don't gear toward adware or annoyances the way Malwarebytes does. So it's kind of unique in that regard. Panda isn't trying to do that. Panda's trying to detect actual virus threats. And so false positives are much more of a concern there. GData also has some false positives, and so does K7.
Hey, Bob?
Yeah.
Can you, going back to Malwarebytes just for a second.
Sure.
So it bumps up in quote unquote false positives.
Yeah.
But I didn't hear you say that they were false positives. It just flags a lot of things. It maybe the filter is a little more finer than some of the others that it flags things that
every company uses different filters, different databases, and different criteria. I will later get into an article that that addresses directly what false positives really mean in the real world. Is it a false positive, or is it something real that others aren't catching?
Can I ask you? Can I ask you? Go ahead, Peter.
I just want to follow up. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Peter, then Jerry. Peter.
No, it was Charlie, I think, actually.
No, Jerry had a question.
Oh, Jerry.
Jerry.
I'm sorry. I
Peter first. Peter first.
We look a lot alike.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're related. Both of you have mothers.
Okay, so Peter.
Malwarebytes. So the false positives, the way they measured false positives, though, is comparable across this range of products, correct?
Yes, they were testing for the same list of commonly used programs and whether or not they were flagged.
Okay, so what I heard you say in Malwarebytes wasn't necessarily true then. So Malwarebytes did in fact have an issue with false positives more so than many of the others.
Again, it depends on what you consider to be a legitimate program, and it depends on whether that installer or that program actually does include a little adware or a little spyware, which most people might consider to be telemetry.
But that would be the same criteria used for everybody. And so Malwarebytes flagged more than others,
right?
But they were declared false by,
yes,
by whatever false is.
Yeah, the false positives on the actual virus samples, I have looked into data about Malwarebytes, Panda, and less so with Norton. Norton, I think, is doing a lot of the same stuff that Malwarebytes is doing. It's declaring stuff to be unwanted and saying, we're going to block this instead of giving you a choice. But with Panda, it actually is some viruses that, no, some things that are legitimate programs that do not fall into the potentially unwanted category in the vast majority of users' view. So different products do have different reasons why they score higher in false positives. I would say we can consider the data comparable because the tests were consistent and the criteria by the test lab were consistent for all products.
Great.
What
Jerry,
does the scale mean?
The scale used, false positives range from 0 to 120. That's just the number of samples they had, the number of programs they were testing. And so 20 out of 120 is maybe 1 out of 6 of the common programs that they thought should not be flagged were. And 40 with Norton LifeLock is a lot of programs that most people would consider just ordinary programs, but Norton doesn't like them. And so they block them. And I think the same thing, exactly the same thing is true of Malwarebytes and all the others.
Jerry, go ahead before you get bumped.
Yeah, criteria.
Okay. I think you've sort of put your finger on it, but when when you talk about specificity and selectivity, the original system for looking at this was with radar, when they were looking at whether radar would pick up bombers coming in. And if you're going to have a bomb dropped on you, you want to turn up the gain a lot. You want a lot of false positives because you want to get every single bomber that's coming in. And so either you have a bomber or you don't. You might have birds, you might have clouds, but you don't care about them. In this case, it looks like it's different in that it's much more sophisticated, that the user has to determine what they think would like to be a true positive versus a false positive. Because if you don't mind, Pops, or if you don't mind that stuff and you're just going to clean them out later, then for you it's not pertinent. For other organizations, which like an IT department in a major company, that might be a very important consideration. So there's more sophistication in this than simply kind of the radar model of true positive, false positive.
Right. We're not talking about, I hope in Norton, we're not talking about flagging, say, Microsoft Office or Microsoft Word as being malware. But we might be talking about flagging something which I know is pretty spammy. Let's say glary utilities. They might flag it as malware when in fact it just has some annoyances and some nagware in it. And it does some things that not everybody's going to like.
Well, I recently had a malicious site warning come up for a site that I knew was fine. And I don't know what in the world they were picking up that flag that.
Yeah. Sometimes legitimate sites do get infected. So there might have been something there.
Oh, okay.
Browser guards are not my specialty. Drew King is the specialist in that, and he seems to be pretty busy today. So
Yeah, he's eating pizza.
Yeah. So another time we can ask about browser guards and websites and how they determine what is good and what is not good.
Yep.
But anyway, one thing I would like to point out, Microsoft Windows Defender does not flag commonly used software that was tested. They seem to be very good on that, and they provide decent protection. McAfee, when they say user dependent, it means the user actually has to decide whether or not to accept things that McAfee flags. Zone Alarm is another one that operates that way, and it's not tested here. You have to decide whether or not you want something blocked. You just get a pop-up saying, choose. block or don't block. And it's this cryptic thing that you can't even read. And that's not very useful in an antivirus product. But anyway, Zone Alarm wasn't reviewed, so I'm not going to worry about that for this purpose.
Tony had his hand up, Bob.
Okay, Tony.
Thank you. Can you just delve one moment on the difference between flag and block? Because when something is blocked, for example, do I have the option still to go and see what it is and decide whether or not I should trash it or open it?
If it's Windows Defender, you have very few options for changing how it blocks or doesn't block. If it's the Windows protected folders or anti-ransomware, you can allow something through the next time, but not this time. If it were Zone Alarm, it's a flag. You choose whether or not to block it. If it's
Bob?
Norton, it will be blocked. Yeah.
I use Windows Defender. So when something comes up, Windows Defender presents a warning. And then one of the things it says, block it or details or something to that effect. And if you go to details, it tells you why it was blocked.
Yep.
Now it may be too geeky for some people, but that's okay. But it tells you why it was blocked. And then it gives you the opportunity to allow it or not allow it.
Okay.
And I know there are a couple of places that I get things from and I go to that get blocked because they're doing low-level things that Windows Defender doesn't like, but I know that they're safe. And so I go through that exercise and I unblock them and I can continue with my work. So, Tony, to your point is that with Defender, you do have the opportunity. You can, let www.hotmartianbabes.com, enter your computer and do what you want to do and take a chance on it. I think most of the products give you the opportunity to bypass that, because if you get a hard stop, it's really useless if you get something that is okay, but just really wants to go down and touch low-level code.
This is a problem with Norton products that they don't have as much user choice, but it is true. With Microsoft, you've got to make a distinction between Windows Defender and the browser safeguard. The browser safeguard is very different. There you do have a choice. It's with the antivirus where it thinks something really is a virus that it's a lot more difficult. And yes, I've run into this with things like near sulfur utilities that were downloaded. It didn't like the installer. It didn't like the download. And then I tried to run it. It didn't like how it ran. The protected folders didn't like it, and on and on. But yeah, in the real world, I'm going to reference an article about whose real world are we talking about, yours or somebody else's. Just in pure protection, we can see now here, false positives would probably refer to flagging things that aren't viruses as though they were. Because here Malwarebytes is very low on false positives. Panda is still high. K7 is rather high. And everybody else is quite low on false positives when it comes to direct malware protection. But the ones that let things through include Trend Micro, and there's a few others that just have a little bit of this red at the top. And so they're not 100%, but they're plenty good, I'll bet you. And the other recent tests, performance impact. This will tell you whether there's excessive impact on system performance. And the thing that jumps up is Microsoft, Windows Defender. I don't know how they got that number. I don't have an experience of problems with Windows Defender interfering with system performance. I don't know how they tested that. So we'd have to go into details. Total Defense, there are other labs that find similar findings. Trend Micro has impact. Again, Malwarebytes Premium, I don't know whether this is accurate either. I don't know how they got that number from Malwarebytes. Most people say it's very low impact. And then they say GData and Avira. I've used Avira, and yes, it does have a significant impact. But I find Norton products have had, well, historically, Norton products had more impact than they have now. They are getting better on that. Panda is low impact. Kaspersky is low impact, always has been. And Bitdefender is fairly decent too. AVG and Avast are currently lower impact than they used to be. So the impact on system performance does vary over time, and it varies depending on how you're testing it. Here's the false alarm test, where they really were looking for things that weren't just differences in what they were detecting. It was actual flagging, actual blocking of legitimate software. And Panda and K7 are the ones that are high. LifeLock, they thought it was a little bit on the high side, but not terrible, not terrible at all. I think most of the rest of these tests, whoops, get back to test charts. Okay. The rest of the tests, yeah, the rest of the tests are older and they haven't been used. The tests haven't been run in a long time. So I think it's time to move on to the next test lab. There is one more test lab beyond AVComparatives and AV test. As Steve put into the chat, AV test also does Mac. Well, AVComparatives, AVComparatives, I want to get to their homepage. That's in my document.
By clicking on the logo.
Here we go. This is the link I had. AVComparatives, they don't announce that they test for Mac, but they do, I think they do have some Mac tests. But anyway, these are the products that are tested by AV Test for Windows. And what I want to do is go back. I'm sorry, AVComparatives. AVComparatives, those are the ones that are tested. And then AV Test. Let me do this again. There. AV Test tests Internet of Things, and they have some tests there. Mac OS Antivirus, they do test. And they have the same thing, only they have fewer products because there are fewer products for Mac. I noticed they don't have Intego in there. But anyway. Back
Also,
to the
it looks like
Windows.
there's no difference between any of the products they tested.
I'll let others address that. People who are Mac people.
Except
Well, I'm
Total
sure-
AV has a 5 on one of the scores. The other ones are all 6s.
Yeah.
Just looking at the-
Better eyes than I have, Steve. Nice going.
And there were others that did include Intego, and it tested quite well too. So AVComparatives, SE Labs is a UK organization, and they also have tests. I downloaded their PDF because sometimes it won't come up. And this test lab, SE Labs, has some very detailed results that they can present. And for a moment, I'm going to minimize you guys so that I can change my, I should be able to, let me see if I can, yeah, that's what I wanted to do. Zoom in. Okay, so now we can see a table, which is the executive summary of SE Labs. And here they tested a few products, quite a few. And they found Microsoft Windows Defender to be 99% accuracy. Legitimate accuracy means not flagging legitimate programs. That's basically the higher percentages mean there are fewer false positives. And protection accuracy, here there were some differences in protection accuracy between Kaspersky, Norton, very high in protection accuracy. Then the next tier is about Avast and AVG and F-Secure and Microsoft Defender. Those were rated as 98%. And then when you get down into Avira, Sophos, GData, and McAfee, those did okay, but they didn't do quite as well in this particular test environment. Komodo and WebRoot did not do well, and they're usually not tested by other organizations. But some people still use them, so they show up in some test labs. So total accuracy, which is the overall protection rating. And we have various awards that were given from AAA down to AA down to A. The very fact that there are so many with AAA shows how small the differences were. And here's a chart showing how small these differences from 100% are until you get down to Komodo and WebRoot. And I'm not just trying to knock products, it's just that's how they test. There is a piece in this PDF about the attack chain and how hackers do what they do. And that is something more detailed than I want to get into, but they also have a specific example of an attack chain. And you can see there's a lot of moving parts here, a lot of stuff to protect. And that's why one overall rating doesn't necessarily tell you everything. And we have protection ratings. Now, protection accuracy is also an important thing that people should be paying attention to, because if this part of your antivirus fails, you can get infected. So again, Kaspersky and Norton performed perfectly. There's another big tier from Microsoft down to, about Avast that do very decently well. And there's another tier that I would say goes from Avira down to McAfee. They'll protect you, but they're not as good as some of the others. And Komodo and WebRoot did not do well, as shown in this graphic chart. Again, more on the protection scores. It shows the overall level of protection with no distinction between what was neutralized, which means quarantined, or what was blocked. And again, we see the same general pattern, except in here, Komodo did well on being able to either quarantine or block. The previous test, I think, was about whether or not it outright blocks. And again, a chart on how well they did. So Komodo isn't necessarily as bad as it looked in the previous results. Now, here's a composite chart of how you are protected, whether things are blocked, whether they are neutralized, or whether you would get compromised. And I think you can see the colors. The white on gold isn't such a great color scheme, but you can see what they did in a table, and you can see down below graphically how well they did. And this is why Komodo doesn't get knocked as badly in this test. They are able to quarantine stuff even though they don't fully block it. But WebRoot completely fails in many instances. And McAfee, GData, and Sophos, and even Avira, you might want better protection than they offer, if you're judging by this. Legitimate accuracy has to do with false positives. And again, here, the higher numbers indicate fewer false positives. And Komodo and WebRoot in these tests did not do well on this.
Bob, why do I care if something is either blocked or neutralized? Either one. Why wouldn't I simply care about the total and leave it at that?
If you quarantine something, it is still in your system. There's a small chance that something in quarantine can break out or might be able still to operate. And if something is quarantined or neutralized, there may be other components that were not detected. Whereas if it's completely blocked, there's a greater chance that nothing did get onto your computer. Some malware will go onto your computer, do its dirty work, and then it will neutralize itself or it will leave. And products that detect and block these sorts of things are giving you better protection. Personally, I wouldn't care too much which it did. It's an indication of the strength of the protection and how comprehensive it is. And
If you're Bob,
yeah.
if you're quarantined, can you delete that, get rid of that, or no?
That's the problem. Removal is not covered in most of these tests. But if you want to remove something from quarantine, sometimes you can be successful. Sometimes it doesn't work. And sometimes it's better not to quarantine something, because if you leave it in its original position, it is a lot easier for an outside of the operating system scanner that you run from a USB drive or from Linux. It's a lot easier to locate where the stuff is and to remove it. Quarantine is locked, and outside scanners may not be able to remove it. So it does affect your ability to remove it using other outside of the operating system products. So yes, it's better to block, and it's even better to be able to remove completely than to have to quarantine something.
Hey, Bob, can you define how or explain how files or files are quarantined? My understanding was they were moved to a directory that is not on the search path for executables and other programs that are used to run. So therefore, that it's sort of like having your photos, in a photo folder that isn't executed.
It goes to a location that, if we were talking Linux, it would be marked no exec, non-executable. That doesn't mean it's impossible for something to execute from there. It just means that you would have to have really high level privileges or a serious compromise of your system in order for that to execute. But there is malware that can hide in firmware. There is malware that can hide on the boot track, and malware that can hide in controllers of SSDs. And if that calls up something that's in a quarantined location, it's possible, though highly unlikely, that it might get reactivated. Windows also has a registry, and that's a whole different area of problems. So again, it's better that it be blocked, and if it can be removed completely, that's good. But if it's only quarantined, you might run into future problems. Now, a complete reinstall of Windows will get rid of anything that's in quarantine. So anyway, there also are some interaction ratings here that show what happens, what kind of interaction is required to achieve blocking or allowing. How much control does the end user have? And it's kind of interesting stuff to look into, but the default to block is considered more protective than having the user have to decide. And there are things about impact which are not terribly useful to us right now. Okay, I have now taken up nearly a half an hour, and what happens now is I want to go into one that is non-ranked testing, because it's another source people go to, and it's Virus Bulletin. And what Virus Bulletin does is it certifies. You notice that some of these labs also give their stamp of approval, their seal of approval to some products and not to others. Well, Virus Bulletin does this also without ranking. And there's a list of products A to Z that have the Virus Bulletin VB100 certified. And you notice many of these have been certified in 2022. So it's very up to date. But it doesn't include all possibilities, but it does include Mac products like Intego, and it does include some products that are more corporate endpoint. So it's a big mix. And that's basically what you've got there from Virus Bulletin. What else have we got? I just want to note that there is a place called TPSC. This is the PC security channel, which is based in Nottingham, England, and actually London, UK. And what they do is they produce videos that show their opinions of various products and how they tested them. So here you can get more into what methodologies they used and why they said what they said, as well as what they said. I basically only mention this because there is a Reddit thread which summarizes and contains a table. And this table summarizes the results from several of these laboratories. Computer Solutions, I was not able to find the place online, and their methods are highly suspect. They gave Microsoft a 65 rating based upon very questionable methodology. And this impacted the overall rating in the average percent here from this Reddit. By the way, all these references are in my document, which will be in Word docx format and will be posted at the end of my talk. So there are these various products, and TPSC is the site I just said makes videos, but they make them rather infrequently. They don't cover a lot of products. AVTest, AVComparatives, Virus Bulletin has some rankings, but again, they're kind of infrequent. And SE Labs, which didn't rank everything, but they ranked a lot of stuff. Okay, so now some interesting stuff. General interest articles on AV testing. And these come from the SE Labs blog. And I want to make sure that I am in, yeah, I'm in the correct Zoom level. Okay, so can general security tests be useful? Real world security reports don't always reflect your real world. And people who are interested can read about this and find out what would be the perfect security test, shopping around for security testing, and various things about reviews and complexity in enterprise product testing. Then they go on to do an enterprise sales pitch for their particular services, which you can skip at the end of the article. 4 ways to treat real world security reports. You might want to gloss over that, but what they're trying to do is push you to use their services for your enterprise. But there
Is that how they monetize their services?
Oh, yes. They are a testing lab that does contract out.
Do these labs charge the antivirus programs to be rated?
No. West Coast Labs had a problem with that. That's one of the reasons they went out of business. But no, AVComparatives does not accept money. AVTest does not accept money.
So there's no financial incentive for them to rate a program higher or lower.
No, and there's no problem with the kind of bribery that is believed to have happened where insiders slipped the samples over to the vendors and they could tune their product to the test. That happened with West Coast Labs.
Oh.
It does not happen as much, though no one can be sure there's no leakage. There's very little evidence that anybody's tuning their product to the test these days. And what you want to do is later on, I'm going to go into reviews and roundups you see lower in my article. That's another way of checking for that kind of thing, because even though each review and each roundup, they may accept ads from various companies. Overall, if you take a summary, if you take many of them together, you can get an idea of what's showing up most frequently in their lists. And that's what I want you to watch for when I go into that area. One more thing about false positives, since we were discussing it. And this is also from SE Labs. How to test for false positives. False positives are not all equal. And they're not always real false positives. Sometimes they're actual correct results that other companies missed in their product. And so you have to measure a certain kind of balance and security. And this article, for those who are interested, will go into some details about that, probably also pitching the services of SE Labs. So they do have objective information in their blog, but they end with a sales pitch. And, this is the kind of thing, I'll point out one review where you can really tell the difference. In reviews and roundups, I'm just going to do summaries because I have links to the articles. And we'll start with Tom's Guide. Tom's Guide is a very reliable tech publication, but they do accept advertising, so you never know. And here's what they like. These are ranked. The paid antivirus: Kaspersky, Bitdefender, Norton, ESET, Nod32, McAfee, and Trend Micro. Now, between January and February, the ratings changed in terms of which companies were at which place. That isn't really an inconsistency. These are different antivirus products by the same company in some cases. So again, paid, Kaspersky was still on top with Total Security. Bitdefender still on top with their Antivirus Plus, which is the same product. Norton Antivirus Plus and Norton 360 Deluxe, also same ranking. McAfee moved up with Internet Security versus Antivirus Plus. Trend Micro, Maximum Security versus Antivirus Plus moved up. And ESET Nod32 did better than ESET Smart Security Premium in the rankings. And Sophos came in here, and Sophos Home Premium wasn't ranked at all in January. And they also did free antivirus. Now, Bitdefender no longer is doing their free antivirus as of June, but Kaspersky, Bitdefender, Windows Defender ranked in the middle, and Avast and AVG. And they gave an honorable mention to Malwarebytes Free. Why didn't they rank it with the others? Because Malwarebytes Free, in Tom's Hardware's view, is a more specialized product. It doesn't target the same kind of malware. And this is what Malwarebytes, the organization, says. They aren't really targeting everything that everybody else does. They want their product used alongside of Windows Defender or other antivirus, which you can do. It's compatible with many other antivirus programs. So even though Malwarebytes paid does turn off Windows Defender, you had a setting, and I think you still have in Malwarebytes paid, where you can tell it not to integrate with the Windows Security Center, and then it doesn't block Windows Defender from doing some of what it does. So they complement each other, and they can be used together, and with very good results very often. Malwarebytes has a browser guard that is different and better than Windows Defender. It's only available in their premium edition. Oh, wait a minute. The browser guard by itself from Malwarebytes, I think you can get for free.
That's
Last
correct.
I read. Yeah.
So it is correct.
Yeah, and their browser guard is considered good. Thank you, Peter. Now let's go into PC Mag, which is where Neil Rubenking hangs out. He's very well respected and tends to be pretty objective, even though the publication does accept ads. His paid summary, he gives stars. So we're not able to make the fine distinctions we are in the others. So in the 5-star category, Bitdefender, Antivirus Plus, and that's probably pretty accurate. They are well noted as being a great product. Kaspersky, also well respected. They're 4.5, which is pretty good. But he says WebRoot Secure Anywhere ranks 4.5. That is not consistent with other people who have tested. He seems to have a personal preference for WebRoot for some reason. ESET Nod32 is up there. He likes Malwarebytes Premium. And McAfee, Norton. Norton used to always rank on top of PC Mag Roundup, and they were a sponsor of PC Mag. And this seems to have been remedied somewhat in recent years. I'm glad of that. Silence, I don't know what it is. It's one that others don't test. And MCSoft shows up in Reuben King's rankings. Again, this is sort of in the middle to lower middle of effectiveness in the paid products. F-Secure and G-Data were not so good. And Trend Micro does better in other people's testing. So I'm not sure how this happened. Again, in the free table summary, Avast, free he likes, and Kaspersky, that's just alphabetical. AVG free did decently well. Then Avira and Microsoft Defender are about equal. And Adaware free, he tests Zone Alarm, but it kind of lags behind. And Adaware, I haven't heard of it being available or updated in quite some time, but I guess it's there. Malwarebytes free was not reviewed here again because it's not a full-featured antivirus program. Malwarebytes free is one of these second opinion scanners, which I don't have time to go over today. And then Techradar also has rankings, and these are mostly paid. Bitdefender is up there again, Norton, Kaspersky, the usual suspects. Trend Micro is up there, and then they go with Avast paid, and that's down in the ranking near Microsoft Defender. And then there's Avira, McAfee, WebRoot again, and Sophos Home. CNET is an interesting one. This is PC World. PC World does accept paid ads from some of these products. And this may help to explain why they are so different. They place Avast and Avira much higher and Total Security. And they place Kaspersky Cloud, which is an interesting category. It's a cloud antivirus. No time to explain that today, except to say they keep their database on remote servers instead of on your PC. And they claim they can catch 0 days much easier. They also are noted for having great heuristics, which is a behavioral way of catching malware. Norton 360 was one of the ones they liked. Then they go down to Trend Micro, AVG. They rank Bitdefender they rank Bitdefender a bit lower than Avast, and nobody else seems to do that. So again, these rankings can be taken with a grain of salt based on who's the advertiser this month or something like that. And they, for some reason, put McAfee in their list way down, even though it ranked higher. That is also something I suspect is due to advertising preference. But anyway, the PC World is a fairly reliable publication, and I wouldn't discard the list just because they accept advertising. And ZDNet also ranked some stuff. Again, Kaspersky is up there. They liked Malwarebytes. These are not ranked. They just said the top ones were Kaspersky, Malwarebytes, Norton, Bitdefender, and McAfee, or McAfee. And then CNET was not ranked. They do best of categories. And so they have best of Windows, free Windows, which is Windows Defender. Norton LifeLock was in there, Bitdefender. Best on demand was Malwarebytes, and I think that is probably accurate there. McAfee, et cetera, et cetera. CNET does not list Avast or Kaspersky. They have a problem with both of these. They still are mad at Avast for the CCleaner malware problem, which showed up a couple of years ago, and for alleged spyware and sharing of data. Kaspersky, they have a problem with because they are Russian, because they are based in Russia, and Russian state-sponsored hacking was accused, but never proven for Kaspersky. Russian hacking, however, is back in the news now. So you might want to consider that if you consider Kaspersky. And that's it for this year. Anybody want to contribute some discussion?
Bob, CCleaner and Avast, they're the same company?
Yes, and I think they are being taken over by somebody else.
Thank you.
I think it might be Norton is getting a hold of that company. Actually, Norton might clean up their act if they do get a hold of them. So it might not be a bad thing, but they might go paid.
You know, I received a phishing email saying I didn't have, I think it was from McAfee, but I can't remember. Yeah, it was McAfee.
Yeah.
I don't have it on my computer. And I got an email saying that my credit card, thank you for using McAfee, very polite, and that my credit card will be charged $250 for the update or whatever it was for, you know, for renewal. And so, and they wanted you to contact them if you didn't want to renew. And I did contact them, and they were very nice, and they wanted to help me take over my computer and do all sorts of things to help me
Yeah.
out. I thought it was
Oh, yeah.
very interesting.
Well, you got to be really careful about that because just by contacting them, if you give them enough information,
And give them any information.
yeah, you don't want to give them any information. You play with them at your risk.
Other than my bank account, and my social security number, I didn't give them anything.
Well, your bank account and social security number, what harm could they do?
Right? What could they do?
With my social security number, that's actually true.
You,
Since
you
it's
didn't
fake.
give, you
Since it's
didn't give
fake.
them the routing codes, Jerry?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
No,
I
it-
just want to make
Some,
sure.
there is a guy who does a video and it shows what he did with one of these phone calls. He got a phone call telling about a problem and how he just kept going with the guy on and on and on. I did get a call once saying that my Windows machine was infected. Let me help you fix it. And I'm using a Mac.
Well, I kept asking them, do they know who the account owner is, or do they know the license number? Because that's all stuff that Microsoft should know.
Steve, I get a couple of those calls every year about my Windows having been updated and we don't have a PC in our house. We have 4 Macs. And the thing is, a couple of times I carried them along with a conversation, you know, and it was interesting. The moment they realized I had Macs only, they hung up on me.
Well, it's interesting that they didn't offer to fix your Mac. It looks like John Howard has his hand up.
I just comment that I've used Avast Free on my Macs for, more years than I can count. At least 10. And I've never really suffered any major attacks. Avast is annoying because free because about 2 or 3 times a week it offers to do something special for me if I would only upgrade.
Right. Yeah, they do have additional features. Steve?
Well, I don't want a VPN. They keep telling me I want a VPN and I don't want a VPN.
Yeah. I think they also have a browser guard that may be available only to paid.
Well, John, I should be able to give you an opinion. I have Avast on one of my Macs and I just loaded AVG on this one. So we'll see what happens.
Okay.
Anybody else doing Mac?
I think Charlie's hand is up.
Okay. So does anybody do security software on Macs? And if not, why not?
That's a question that I
Charlie's
can ask
machine is
myself.
so old. Charlie's machine is so old that the viruses have lost interest.
Well, viruses don't lose interest in me as I get older. People viruses.
Yeah, he's still on COVID Alpha.
I could say something, but I won't, about my own experiences. But now Antivirus Products, and I'm about to hand this back to the group so that we can do other stuff. Antivirus Products, you got to remember that also includes what you do to protect your browser. And it also may include other things that you wouldn't normally consider to be strictly antivirus types of things, not full programs. There are second opinion scanners and things like that. Is anybody using things that work alongside of, say, Windows Defender or whatever else you're using?
As I said, I have the Malwarebytes browser add-on that I use on my machine on top of Defender.
Does that slow you down?
I haven't noticed it.
Some browser guards will, but that one, you're right, Peter, it tends not to. I,
You know,
Is
there's
any-
there's one subtle area, Bob, that you didn't talk about, but really that has intrigued me for a long time, is that on emails, lots of companies, when they go phishing, they also use pixel trackers.
yeah,
And so they can tell whether you opened up an email or not. And sometimes simply by opening the email or even looking at it, it starts, especially if you have some settings on your machine that let things run automatically, that as soon as you open the email, a program can run. For example, if you have autoplay of videos or something like that turned on.
yeah.
And that can really get you in a whole heap of trouble in a hurry. There's settings
Yes,
on
it
most email browsers, email programs that don't let images be loaded and things be run. There was a bigger problem with Java, and it's not so much now anymore. But pixel trackers are a big deal. It's amazing how many there are out there.
Yeah. By the way, I think you're talking about JavaScript,
JavaScript is correct.
because JavaScript is not Java.
Fair enough.
Okay.
One
So-
more question, if I may.
Sure, sure.
You know, you gave us quite the list of a widespread somehow presentation on many different things and what we should be
Yeah.
aware of. But would it be of any value to other Mac users if you, for example, took 5 minutes at some point to tell us what you have on your computer, on your Mac, or is it Steve that has
It's
it?
Windows.
Like-
I don't have the Mac, it's Steve.
Oh, okay. So Steve might want to do that at some point.
I'll give you about a 1 minute discourse. I have a couple of Macs here. On one of them, I have Avast, and I also think I have Malware Bytes. On the one that I'm using here, I just loaded AVG, and it scanned all my files. It also scanned external disks, which is good, and also Malware Bytes. I have had no virus difficulties.
Okay, I just have the malware bytes.
Well, AVG and Avast are, you can get free editions. I chose AVG because you can buy it, and if you want to buy it, you pay a single price, as opposed to Avast, you have to pay a monthly fee.
Steve,
Yeah.
do you have Malware Bytes free or Malware Bytes with the browser guard and these type of thing?
I loaded free.
It's just free?
Yes.
You don't have premium. Do you have premium?
If you pay for it, I don't have it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, on both PCs and Macs, I think you can get the browser guard from Malwarebytes, and it's a free add-on.
Yeah, correct. You know, to your presentation, Bob, it's kind of interesting, is that the incremental difference between the paid products and the free products, in my opinion, is very small. And so you can have a discussion about bang for the buck in terms of what you get when you start paying for the products.
You're
Well,
talking about the incremental protection that's provided. I would agree with that.
Yeah,
I-
both. Yeah, incremental protection and the premium. You're right.
well, when you're talking about the difference between free and paid suites, though they can be very pricey, do include a lot more, and they may cover multiple PCs. But the main thing is they can include things like a VPN, they can include better web protections, email protection, so that you don't get things like these single pixel attacks and stuff of that nature. Before we get too much into this, I think Dick Wagner has his hand up.
Yeah, I have a quick question about CCleaner. What is the problem with it? I have CCleaner on my computer along with Malwarebytes Free and Windows Defender, and have the browser guard on that too. What's the problem with CCleaner?
CCleaner 2 years ago had an actual piece of malicious software that got embedded into it. It got onto their servers somehow. And they cleaned it up and fixed it up. But the other thing about all the products from Avast and AVG is that they have what's known as telemetry. They phone home. And there are questions about how they use that data that they collect on you. Remember, if the product is free, you are likely the product and the profit center. So that's the objection. I find that to be kind of spurious now because CCleaner has cleaned up its act. Ironically enough, CCleaner cleaned up its own act, and there is a possibility Norton may be taking over the whole enterprise over there, and Norton does not mess around with you.
Thanks.
Would large institutions have a different equation in the sense that they have a huge investment in their IT infrastructure, and can have a very unsophisticated group of users, on their large network, and so the incremental protection provided by paid commercial programs could be for them very substantial.
Well, enterprise and academic users have entirely different environments. They do, as you say, have a mix of unsophisticated and sophisticated users. They are exposed more to the internet. They have remote access. They have things of that nature. They need a different class of product. And often they have to have hardware appliances as well as really sophisticated, very up-to-date. I won't even call it antivirus, but anti-attack software. And they have entire IT professionals or departments that either contract with them or are in-house to take care of this on a daily basis. They get into a lot more email phishing and email infection issues. They suffer denial of service, DDoS. And so that's a whole different topic area that could take up an entire session easily.
So, but their risk is substantial.
Oh, yes, much different, much higher risk.
The financial risk.
Yeah, and what you'll hear experts like Susan Bradley of Ask Woody doing is she'll give one piece of advice to consumers to hold off for 3 weeks on Microsoft updates. She tells businesses, don't hold off, especially on some of these like Print Nightmare. Do something now. And even though it's going to break stuff, do it now. And that is because enterprise has very different exposures from individuals. Although,
Jerry,
although
go
your
ahead,
network
finish,
is
Bob.
exposed, your network is exposed through things like IoT devices.
Jerry, just to put a finer point on it, most enterprises have a very sophisticated gateway process. Among other things, they have, like you have a modem that connects your computer to the outside world through, you have your network in the house that goes through a modem to your cable company, whatever it is, and that goes to the outside world. What many institutions do is have multiple appliances between you, the internet in the company, and the outside world, with at least one, maybe two no man's land, so to speak. So for example, one way that most people talk is on browsers, there's a port called port 80, which listens to what browsers are talking about. And it's very commonly used, and it's wide open. And there's port 443, I believe, for HTTPS now. And so those are common ports that are used to talk to the world, so that everybody knows what's coming in on those two ports. They're sort of like extensions, if you will. So what a lot of companies do is they have a no man's land where they let you talk on those ports, but when they send things out into the world, they move things around in different ways, so that it has to go through different ports, and it's sort of like a rat in a maze for the data, so that it goes to a random port inside your company and then gets pushed out properly, and then gets translated back and forth between the 80 and the 443 appropriately as things are going out and things are coming in, so that they can interrogate data and traffic coming over those two ports, among many others. The same thing with remote access. They use specialized ports going through multiple misdirection devices, if you will, as well as having very sophisticated pieces of hardware that almost are like servers in themselves, that interrogate all the internet traffic. Because among other things, internet is wide open. If you take a device called a sniffer, which is just a pure device that sits on the cable and tells you everything going past the cable, you can literally see virtually every piece of internet traffic going on in the world. And that, that's out there. The cable in front of your house has everything in the world going on, because that's the way the internet works.
Okay, and my notes are in chat, my document, and I am going to put the PDF as well from SE Labs, because the web version doesn't always load. Okay, so we have the Windows Antivirus Roundup, and we have SE Labs, the report. And with that, I think if everybody agrees, we can move on to something new.